That is, okay. So I live in kind of a small place. It's a rural place. I practice in Northwest Colorado. That's not true. I live in Northwest Colorado. I practice nationally. I'm a patient advocate in private practice, as many of you are. I came to this profession from a background in bioethics and bioinformatics at a large academic medical center. So I was interested to hear the stuff about HIPAA and data protection in the last talk. In fact, she queued it up kind of nicely for me, as you'll see later. Let's see, in Northwest Colorado, I ski and run and paddle and play music. And that's kind of the other side of what I do besides what I show up as here. So what I want to talk about is this idea that when we work in smaller systems, in my case, it's a rural, local system. In other people's cases, it's referrals that you make to certain, let's say, certain clinics, and you know all the players involved there, or your family and friends, which is also another kind of intimate setting. Wait, which way did I go? The other way, okay. Here's an example. I sit on the clinical ethics committee. On that clinical ethics committee is my lawyer, my late ex's hospital attending, the advanced practice provider who sees many of my oncology clients, community members, a couple of my neighbors have cycled in and off of this committee, and the hospice nurse where I sometimes volunteer. So it's super tempting to kind of talk shop with folks. In contrast, my former ethics committee at a large medical center was made up of practicing colleagues, and we didn't know each other's personal lives in particular. We just knew what we knew at the table, at the ethics table. So I was thinking about that recently, and so I decided to seek some scholarship about this particular area of being a patient advocate. What are the ethical concerns? What was actually happening? What was I seeing in my own practice, and what might other people run into in theirs? So that's kind of where this talk came from. I do have, apparently I did some clever thing with the slides. So the whole idea behind this talk is the concept. What really attracted me to it was the idea of overlapping roles in community. It doesn't have to be a rural community. It can be your city community. It doesn't matter. So, one example is Anna's orthopedist plays pickleball with Anna's husband. Anna's also a PT at the hospital and works with her ortho. Anna's youngest son built the custom home that Anna's PCP lives in. So this is a real thing. This is a friend of mine who's, this is her situation. Anna's oldest son is engaged to the daughter of Anna's husband's cardiologist. The word incestuous comes to mind, which I think is an unfortunate term for what I'm talking about, but you get the gist, right? So I'm the patient advocate for the whole family. Several of these people are either on my ethics committee or have been involved in an ethics case. The son who built the custom home was involved in an unfortunate ethics case, and I got to know the family and then ended up helping them with various things. And then, of course, we're all the same age. All of our kids skied and played soccer together in town. I did get to learn pickleball, so that was a thing. I got invited to join because I knew all these people. Anyway, so that's kind of the setup. I want to be able to have you identify 3 examples of subtle breaches of medical confidentiality in a rural or isolated community setting, and to identify how an ethical framework that might help you to think about it. And then I want you to be able to notice as you go forward in your next year, before the next conference, how do you mitigate any particular conflicts that you find in your own patient advocacy practice? And so the reason why I would rather this were kind of a nice round circle and people could share, do other people have you thought about this? Does this happen in your own practice? Have you ever been sitting in a coffee shop and you're on somebody's my chart, you're looking at it, and a friend comes up and says, "Oh, what are you doing?" And you quick turn your phone over, I don't know, it just feels like a secretive practice. I see a few nodding heads. Any stories that you want to share right now? Oh, Michelle.
I have show and tell.
Excellent.
So I use one of these on my laptop.
I saw that last year.
Yes, and since I travel a lot and I'm in the hospital, I don't write anything down. I use my laptop. I have a charting system software. So this is amazing. Nobody can see.
Yeah, I love that thing. Where did you, can you share where you got it?
On Amazon.
Okay, cool.
Because I order everything on Amazon.
Well, and Jen might have left, but I wanted to know that my backpack is right here, which has my laptop in it, which is where, it's an encrypted laptop, and that's where all my patient records are. And it doesn't leave my site either, as much as I can make that happen. Although I've never gone head-to-head with TSA about it. So I already did the Western Slope community, and this is just to show you how small it is. It's a ski area, so it's not particularly tiny when there's tourists in town, but it's surrounded by ranching and mining communities, also small kind of in their own right. Locals and neighbors all recognize each other. In fact, I've been there 40 years. I recognize some of the tourists who come, every year, and their kids as they've grown up. So the big deal is that all these people have different roles in the community. Where I come from is a large city. Again, surrounded by suburban communities and small rural towns. And there also the locals and the neighbors recognize each other. I've been out of my town for 40 years and I still go back there and someone says, oh, hey, is that the... So again, people have multiple roles in the community. Let's see, I don't know why this slide's in here. Oh, I know why, because I wanted to introduce this topic of care islands. So this would be a population group, and this is from the scholarship about the ethics of rural medicine. Let's say there's a medical region. It could be urban, rural, suburban, exurban. Each one of them has their own culture. It has their own rates of diversity that's come up over time. And all of this affects how people interact with medical systems. They act as smaller, closed systems, often within a larger system. I work mostly with oncology patients, and the clinics where I refer people are all around the country. But over the years, I've developed relationships in all of those clinics with the oncologists, with the nursing staff, with the schedulers, our first line of contact with most systems now. And they knew who I am. I think there's a voice thing, like I don't know if their computers say, oh, it's her again. But there are closed systems, so even in these large groups. Other examples of care islands might be a rural community, a farming community or something someplace. Or it could be isolated economically. It could be isolated by not having medical care that's particularly local, so that all the people have to travel to one place. I think about tribal reservation systems, island communities, things that are unreachable by seasonal weather, things that are offshore from us. And senior assisted living communities. You might have a single senior assisted living community that you work with, and those folks have, one doc that comes in all the time, and so you interface with that doctor and those providers. And that creates its own care island. Urban neighborhoods. I'm thinking of this place where in the city of Denver, they rerouted the main highway 70 through town, and they isolated this one whole community from that. Not only did they isolate the community, there was this whole creation of a different level of pollution, and so all these young kids are ending up at National Jewish Hospital with respiratory stuff. And so I've referred a couple of people in that setting as well. They all know each other, now they all know me, and now everybody knows everybody at National Jewish that are seeing these kids. So that's another area that could be considered a care island. I'm kind of skipping through some of these because I really would rather hear your experiences than share my own, actually. So care islands are medically underserved in general. There might be one primary care practice for 25,000 people, like there has been in my town in various years. There might be one independent pharmacy for miles around. A single midwife, where OB departments have closed. Most of the towns around us don't have OB care anymore, or even gynecologic care. Everyone has to come into Steamboat to get that. Or we have a single hospice organization that right now has 4 nurses, and community is 25,000 people. Everybody knows everybody. One more thing, this is from the scholarship about isolated communities and care islands. They carry an outside burden of illness. I already mentioned the major highway thoroughfare that goes through Denver. Or a rural community where employment is centered around, say, we had a particular mine, the Kolowayo mine, and that's where everybody was, and all of those folks know each other, and there's one provider that sees everybody. People talk, even those of us who concern ourselves with HIPAA, we still say, oh, I had this guy, what do you think about this? And all these little details kind of trickle out. When you're in a small setting like this, rural or otherwise, it's super hard to keep a lid on it. And I want to provide just a few ideas of how we can do that. Let's see, what do they have in common? They're all populated by humans. And we're all, well, I'm mostly flawed. You guys are probably all perfect. But we all have our places where we make mistakes. They're all created by relationship building, just like we've done here for the last week. And every interaction gives us more of a network of associations. It also gives us a network for slipping a little bit and sharing. I have a story that'll come up. How does this relate to patient advocacy? We fill in the gaps in care. There might be gaps in family systems, among clients and providers. And we take a role in these communities. I might be the soccer, well, I'm the soccer coach of half of these families, you know. I don't think this is that important. I really want to get to some of your experiences, if that's okay. What you got? Yeah, okay. So imagine bumping into your gynecologist, your pharmacist, and your neighbor all at once in the produce aisle of the local grocery store. I'm going to get to that. Or having coffee at a table next to your advocacy client who's loudly discussing her health concerns with a friend that you both know. Both things that have happened to me. And I want you to think of an example of an awkward encounter you've had, as whether you're the patient advocate in the setting, whether you're the patient, whether you're the provider, whatever that thing is going to be. It's a recipe for lack of confidentiality. And it's up to us, as in the advocacy community, it's up to us to create that confidentiality because we're seeing all of these people, not just one set, all of them. You know, isolated communities tend to be closer knit. But I like this, that patients and families, clinicians, pharmacists, social workers, therapists, and advocates all belong to the same social groups. They shop at the same grocery and pharmacy. They line up together at the local Saturday 5K. And they interact in the same schools, at youth activities, and at restaurants. So I'm hammering that point because I wanted to spur some ideas in you all of like, wow, when might I have taken part in some of this? So I have an awkward scenario, and here it is. I didn't know where to use the guy on the slide, so I picked it for these. Okay, so this is real. I'm at the grocery store, I'm buying cherries. I see my colleague, who's a friend, who happens to be a physician to one of my clients, and she's also buying cherries, and we get to talking about the price of cherries. My client's neighbor comes over to look at the cherries because they're on sale. The neighbor notices us, knows me because I'm her patient advocate. She knows the doctor because she's taken her neighbor, my client, to the appointments. Across the aisle near the tomatoes is the radiologist who alerted the physician to an incidental finding for my client, which is why I have the client in the first place. He notices us and starts to walk over because he sings next to me in choir. There's no degrees of separation, and this is a real story. So yeah, I've hammered this to death. Smaller hospital systems, tight suburban communities, distinct urban neighborhoods. There are few degrees of separation. Specialty clinics, especially oncology. I mean, we have one oncology clinic in our town, and everyone has to go there, and that's what I do. Okay, I think that's good. Yeah, so here's the roles in the story I just told you. There's a patient advocate, there's a physician, there's a radiologist, there's a neighbor, there's an alto, there's a tenor. Radiologist is a tenor. And there's the client who's at the center of it all. You know, and yeah, you get the point. So it's really tempting to talk about the client's condition and care with somebody. If you bump into them, you know, I know you saw so-and-so the other day. And it's not about what their clinical condition is. It just might be, hey, you know, she had to go out of town and she missed her appointment and I'm going to call your office and reschedule it. Or her kid told me this thing and I think it's something that you need to know. There's no good way to do that. Like, how do you not do that when you see somebody that you know who's a close friend? So, of course, talking about these things over cherries violates somebody's privacy. It threatens siloed health information, and that's a whole other talk. How siloed do we need to be? And where is the line between where siloing of information harms versus where it helps? And it creates inappropriate linkages. You know, the neighbor who doesn't know the radiologist with the neighbor. Of course, I'm going to see them playing pickleball next week anyway, probably. Or an advocate with neighbors and clinicians. Where are those linkages appropriate and where are they not? And how do you wear the pickleball hat versus the client-centered hat? So we can't help but be interconnected, and you know, I wanted to think about how to address this. So I have this sticker on my wall. It's actually a sticker whiteboard thing, and I write these things down. And so I thought, okay, I want to look at the laws. What's HIPAA? What's mandatory reporting? What are the things that I'm responsible for in my practice? And then in the ethics, what are the shoulds of the situation? You know, the siloing controversy around information notwithstanding. And then I wrote this thing down that said, personalize it. How would I feel if it was me and the cherries were, you know, the gathering place to talk about my care? And then what about standards? What is the minimal information that can be shared between people who know each other? So, you know, HIPAA definitions, I think we've gone through this. I've seen it in several different presentations the last few days. It's intended to protect certain data fields from inappropriate transfer among providers and insurance. It's really a place, its title, what the acronym stands for, should tell you everything. It's Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act. And you guys all know these, I think: covered entity, business associate, and disclosure. The disclosure part is the release, transfer, provision of access to, or divulging in any manner protected health information outside the entity holding the information. And this is where these kind of social, subtle breaches occur. So HIPAA and patient advocates, do good fences make good neighbors? Patient advocates, as Jen said, are not legally bound. She set this up so nicely. But we are duty bound to protect the right to privacy of patients. And it's important that we commit to data protection of records, phone calls, emails, texts, and other app messages. I would even go so far as to say if you're texting a client back and forth and there's any kind of data, that it isn't limited to go see my chart, something was just posted. If they say, here's what was just posted, that should be an encrypted communication. It shouldn't be something that just goes across the wire like that. It's not fair to the patient. And really, it's a risk to us. In the long run, it's a risk to us. Same with emails. Phone calls, you really can't help it, but finding a quiet place instead of the Starbucks is something that's important. I had a young advocate working with me for a while, and I didn't realize that she was working at the Starbucks in town. And she was taking calls. And of course, you can deduce from one side of a call what's happening on the other side. You're just talking to, patients and to providers. Those things exist, and if you guys want to get a hold of me later, I can probably point you in the direction of some of these things. I was telling somebody that I use a piece of legal software where it's not meant to be HIPAA compliant, but it is HIPAA compliant because of the other standards that they use to maintain case notes for legal files. And I can, send you some referrals if anyone wants them. So it's important for us to maintain professional boundaries, to share only pertinent information with appropriate parties, and in an appropriate setting. It wouldn't be okay for me to talk to the pickleball, radiology guy or his family about what's happening to some other member of the family. Even though we want to talk about that, the instinct is to share that, to make the connection. We don't speak with the pharmacist about a client where they're there to pick up our own medications. I heard somebody do that in another setting, and I'm thinking, wait a second, you're here for your own care, but you're going to tell the pharmacist about why this medication that this other guy needs, who maybe he's shot, I don't know, it wasn't her family member, it was a client. We don't have sidebars in medical facilities, and we don't mention one client or patient to another. Maybe I went the wrong way. No, it's a different slide. Okay, so the ethics of this, ethics is going to always be guided by should questions. Should we do this? Should we do that? And should is guided by our values. What are the privacy concerns that you would have if you were the patient? That helps drive our own values, and then that gets back to the should questions. I don't want my neighbor to know about my health condition. I don't want my choir to know about my client. It's too late for that. And I prefer that if it were me, I would prefer that my oncologist and radiologist not speak about me where they can be overheard. Okay, so I'm just going to review quickly the ethical principles. If you've ever heard me speak before on anything, these 4 things come up all the time. Autonomy, the respect for the patient's right to self-determination. And put yourself in that place. Respect for my right to self-determination about my information and my decision-making. Beneficence, that we all have a duty to do good. And these are certainly pillars of clinical ethics, but I would argue that they apply to us as well. Non-maleficence, we have a duty to not harm. And justice, treat all people equally and equitably. That's a whole nother topic, actually, when it comes to patient advocacy, and maybe I'll present that someday. So these are the things to ask yourself, and then I'd like to see if anybody has any things that they would prefer to share about what they have experienced. Are your actions in your community upholding your client's autonomy? i.e., it's their right to share their health information, not you. Are you doing good or harm? Even if sharing information would be a good thing, you have to consider, is there a bit of harm in that and just in the sharing piece? And is everyone in your orbit, all of the roles, being treated equitably? I've seen a few people kind of smile when I asked for others' experiences. Does anyone want to share one? There's one over there.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Rutherford, and we're from Montana, so Montana's rural. We work on a Native American reservation, and our participants are all Native American clients that we work with for tribal health. the communities on the reservation are small, so a lot of our clients we see them outside of work. My husband and I participate in pool leagues, billiard leagues, so a lot of times clients walk in or patients walk in. But when I first meet with the patient, I set my boundaries. This is the time that we will talk between my work hours. You don't contact me after work hours. If you see me after work hours, we don't talk about work or your issues. So I'm good at setting boundaries. I have a couple coworkers that we do stuff together outside of work, and I always have to remind them, don't talk shop. So boundaries is a big thing to do, especially when you live in a small community.
It's such a big part of what we do that it's hard not to talk shop, And I mean, I have a hard time, well, actually I don't, but a lot of people have a hard time standing in a corner and not saying anything. It's how we connect to each other. It's very human to want to share our experiences. Yeah, thanks for that. What do you do in the community?
I'm a social advocate or a social worker for the tribal care coordination program.
Yeah, so you know a lot of those people. You know a lot of people, and you know what services you're referring to, and they're probably all the same services. Anybody else? Thanks, Heidi.
So what do you do if it's the client who doesn't stop talking about their thing? And recently, it wasn't one of my clients, it was actually a patient of one of my former classmates who were sitting in a pub in Germany in the small valley where I grew up. We were just having a beer, and one of the servers was a patient of my friend's, and he kept coming over and saying how great this therapy was that she did for him and how he was doing this and that. And she was clearly incredibly uncomfortable and just wasn't really sure how to deal with him. She almost, she just wanted to disappear. And we were all just looking at him and thinking, too much information? Or, how do you, he was so enthusiastic, and what he really wanted to do was say that he thought she was a great doctor.
Right.
I mean, it was hard to want to shut him up because he was just really trying to be enthusiastic about the care he was getting, right?
Yeah.
But it's a very small valley where also everybody knows everybody.
Yeah, I think we all have those experiences of being in small settings. Like I said, even if it's just one clinic in a huge city that you refer to. The example I gave earlier that it sounded funny, but I was sitting at a table in a restaurant, and next to me was a woman talking about her great patient advocacy experience. And I looked over, and there is no other patient advocate where I live, so I knew who she was talking about. And I'd given a talk to her women's group maybe the week before or whatever, and I actually took her aside later and said, I really appreciate you referring me to this person, but could you do it quietly, or could you take her outside and talk about it? Because in order for her to convey what patient advocacy was for her, she had to say what her entire clinical, she had to say what her clinical case was so that her friend understood what she was after. So, yeah. Oh, microphone.
Yeah, thank you for this. This is really interesting. I have had some very long-term dear friends who knew what I did and espoused to their families how wonderful the service is, and we all know how wonderful it is, but two of them, their siblings, contacted me separately when each of them were dying with cancer and wanted to hire me, but wouldn't allow me to communicate with their sibling. And so I had to abide by that or just not take the client. But on the side, I talked to my close friends and said, look, I don't have to do this. And they said, no, you can do it. But it was so challenging. I actually couldn't spend a lot of time with them in the process of them passing away because they didn't want their sibling involved. And one of those relationships was, we've just kind of split up a little bit. So it's really challenging, but if that's what the client wants, that's what you have to do. Or not take the client and explain, I'm not capable of doing that, so.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that in a later slide about there are times when you can't really take the client. And what would it be terrible if their names were Bill and Betty, because the one doesn't roll off the tongue, oh wait, no, you're the other one, shit. I have several entire families that I work with because one of them has a genetic thing and it just kind of propagated. It was, I work pretty much only with oncology patients. And so I have found that challenging. They don't have any, they share everything, so it's not a big deal. We've had entire family meetings in the living room. And then another family where there are people all across the country in this family, and somehow they don't have a genetic condition, but they still end up, they all have cancer or some other kind of thing. It is, but I always ask permission, like, if your mother asks me about this, what do you not want me to tell her? One person says, I don't tell her anything because she'll worry. And the other one is like, well, I think she should know, don't you? And if I forget to tell her, would you? So I ask them, okay, if you want me to talk to your mom, you write out something that says, here's what you can say and here's what you can't say. But I think there is a room for that question of, should I even take that client? I don't have too many people to refer to. I think that's one of the problems. I'm hoping to build that network a little bit more. You're on the list.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. So one thing that I have a question about, so the ethical and privacy responsibility that we hold, if a patient is communicating out and about, we're not responsible for that.
We're not.
So, taking them and saying, can you, keep it down or whatever, they are so excited that we're helping them and they want to, shout it from the rooftop and let everybody know there's people out there for you that can help navigate the system and get the care that you need. So I think you want to control yourself, but you can't control outside of yourself.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. This woman was actually talking about someone else who was using me as an advocate. I was her advocate. I was also her neighbor's advocate.
Okay.
And so she was talking about this other person. That's what I took her aside to talk about. But I also think that patients should be, I think patients need to be educated about the privacy of their own data and how to hold that. You're right, we don't have any control over that.
Yeah.
But there are maybe reasons for people to be a little more circumspect.
Right. And then the other part was so we have a contract, it's a HIPAA communication contract. So who can I talk to? Can I text? Can I email? Can I get into a portal? What can I do? What are you giving me permission for? Mm-hmm. And they sign it. So then that liability is taken off your plate because they've directed you to what they're going to allow.
Yeah, that's great. I do a similar thing. And most of my communication is through their portal for the most part. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. And communities aren't always geographic.
Right.
I work a lot with rare genetic connective tissue disorder patients. It's a fairly small community for some of the rarer ones. So they're always telling one another who was helping them with what or what physician to see, et cetera. And they're posting it on social media, which is really challenging, trying to get them to take that stuff down. And then I try and refer them out to the rest of you so that there's a diversity of patient advocates helping them instead of just myself and a handful of other people that are in that space.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know what to do with the social media part. I think I'm just too old to maybe get with the program, but a lot of cancer patients that I have that I work with have
Do you have a question, Malene?
have rare cancers, and they do want to find resources wherever they can find them, and they have no problem with being identifiable on a social media site like Facebook. I got a call from somebody just last week who said, I saw your name on my Facebook group. And I don't want my name on somebody's Facebook group. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I need some younger person to coach me about that kind of thing.
Okay, Deborah, we have another comment.
Okay.
So this is actually following on to Maggie's comment about the social media and people posting details about who they saw and who was good and who wasn't. So some places, some support groups actually have a member created list. The admins will ask privately for suggestions, and the list of, providers or resources that people have found valuable gets put into one document and in the files section, but anonymously without names attached to it. And then other support groups, or sometimes the same support groups, will they'll put in their rules that you can talk about your circumstances. It's like Michelle had said, it's your information, it's your experiences, but you can't name facilities, you can't name doctors, you can't name things like that, because of kind of some of these concerns about privacy. So I just wanted to add that on.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
No, please wait for the mic. Okay, please wait for the mic because I'm not sure.
I hope I have an
You're
answer.
clear over there. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. If it is an individual talking about their own health, their own diagnosis, and a recommendation of the high-quality help they have received, I have never perceived that as a privacy issue. And am I in error in that possession?
No, I think that's personal preference, right? I think
Because they're talking about themselves.
Yeah, no, I get that. And if they're saying, oh, you need to go see this person or this physician or this patient advocate, or you need to go check out this clinic in Mexico, great. I mean, that's okay. In the case that I was mentioning, it was a neighbor talking, it was two people, one of whom I was a patient advocate for both of them. But they were just loudly sharing their own experiences. I guess that's okay. I just don't want my name really out there like that. I would rather people contact me privately so that I can guide them better. Yeah.
I'm coming.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. I think that there's something to consider, though. Like, where do you fall in that? What are your shoulds? What are your values around it?
One other thing to think about and to realize is that by having the type of persona that we do, where, it's okay, but please keep this, or I can't talk about that, is just think about the trust that elicits with other people that were like, well, I can go to her because she will never talk about anything with anyone. So there's that other side of it too. Even if we are telling them, that they shouldn't be talking about things that maybe it's okay for them to, at least they know then that we're going to keep their information confidential.
Yeah, good point. I did not jump over to the table and say, hi, everybody. Did you know you have something different than her and she gets this? And I don't know, maybe it's kind of like the throwback to not talking about salaries or something.
So listening to you is making me think of something that I encountered early on, where I was working with somebody who was giving me some marketing tips and about soliciting reviews from past clients. And they were saying, oh, if you can have a photo next to the person's name and whatnot. And I explained, I said, first of all, I would never have a photo of a client anywhere, or a family member of a client. Second of all, I won't even, on my own website, the reviews are initials only. I won't even put names. Mm-hmm. And it makes me uncomfortable trying to ask somebody for a Google review or any other kind of review where they have to put their name.
Yeah.
So I end up not asking for reviews most of the time.
Same. I don't either. And whenever I put a picture of somebody, it's always a composite. It's something that I've maybe taken of a family member, but it's never attached to the client. I mean, PHI, photos PHI. Initials are PHI.
Question about working with different healthcare systems, and all the healthcare systems that I have, whether it's the hospital or the clinics, all have varying degrees of HIPAA compliance. What do you recommend? Because I have my own HIPAA compliance, but then there's steps that you have to end up taking, so it can become very frustrating at times. I'll fill out a document, I'll scan it in, and then I'll call and they'll go, oh no, that only pertains to this. Or any recommendations on how to work that? I'm not expecting you to solve that big problem, but just suggestions to work through that.
Yeah, so personally I try to reach for the highest level of privacy that I can, whether that's through HIPAA or through some other security document. But when I'm working in a health system, I typically go with what I always ask, what is your standard and what do we need to meet at your standard? And then I'll tell the client, my standards may be a little higher than this, or it's more like this other system over here. and that's what I want to use between us. But for you and your doctor, or you and your health system, I use whatever is their standard. And their standard is based on their own, legal departments telling them who's a business associate, who's not, who can they disclose to and who they can't. So I try to go for the highest level possible. If there's 3 players, who's got the highest level of security? And I'll always check in with the patient. What are you comfortable with? So, yeah, I know that is kind of a weird thing. Why aren't they all the same?
Thanks, Deborah. This is a great conversation, and I just kind of wanted to share my personal experience with some of this. I'm from a very small rural community. I no longer reside there. However, my family, right? And my experience, I'm 5 years in, and I think I've got them trained. But early on, my family would call me and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that so-and-so reached out to you." And I'm like literally, I got really good at saying, I can't even answer that question.
Yeah,
But like I said, now 5 years in, those have slowed down. But there was a specific situation where I was onboarding a new client, and we were going through the process, and at one point, somehow, I can't remember how it came up, it was identified where I was from or something of that nature, and turns out my client knew my entire family. Everybody, my grandfather, my uncles, my dad. It was crazy. And my dad ended up calling me, "Hey, did you talk to so-and-so?" And I said, "You know that I can't talk about that." Yeah. And then because it was such an interesting connection, I went back to my client at one point and I said, "I need to let you know that my dad asked about you. And if you're interested, here is his contact information." Right. Because it was just that deep. And I was like, but I felt like that was the best way for me to handle that. It put him back in control. If you want to reach out to him, I know that he would be really interested to connect with you again. But yeah, training.
Yeah, I get contacts now and again from folks who say, "I would like you to call this person. I know them in this context. They have this thing, and they would benefit from your service." And my stock answer is, "Here's my contact information. They can contact me." I hate the question of, "Oh, I know you're working with so and so. How's she doing?" But that happens all the time. Over the cherries. It was a really good cherry season this year. It just was.
We have time for another comment?
Okay, I'm gonna just, while you're walking over there, I'm gonna spin and see if there's anything else of interest here. Not really. Oh, this one.
Thank you, Deb. This was fabulous. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed hearing the stories, particularly the cherries. But I have a question because I am not really into social media very much other than LinkedIn. And so I am now a little bit conflicted about going on Facebook, advertising my services, and or on Instagram, because it can become a little toxic depending on the client and their feelings, etc. So I would love to hear, or at least see, how many people are social media savvy and know the boundaries to help make everything positive and helpful to everyone else rather than toxic.
Yeah, it's a great question. Anybody want to answer? Michelle does.
Raise the hand again for me. Oh, thanks, Michelle. Right over you.
So a couple things. With the Google review, I actually highly recommend them. But again, it's the ownership is on the person who's doing the review. You're not putting it out there, they're putting it out there. And again, like Jennifer was talking about, the stories, people don't know we exist. Mm-hmm. So if you don't hear the stories and relate to these stories because so-and-so and so-and-so, they don't know that this industry exists. Social media, if, I've been tagged multiple times and, they put all their information out there. All I do is, give them my information, DM me, here's my contact information. We're not going to do it over the platform. So, but social media is not going away.
Right, but it goes both ways. How would you feel if it were all, if somebody's done something? I mean, I've pissed off a couple clients before.
Oh, totally.
What if that shows up on your social?
And
I
it
mean,
will.
I want it for my own protection too, for my own privacy, so I don't go anywhere near it.
And it will, because it's not all going to be perfect. So people have to look through. People know, the naysayers and the authentic, and so you just have to roll with the punches. But I mean, it is your choice if you want to be on the platforms. But again, that education that this industry exists is
That's
really,
important.
really important.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. I still probably won't participate in that kind of thing. But this is a picture of an elevator. In my hospital at the University of Colorado, there were signs inside the elevator. Don't mention patients. Don't talk about patients. We don't share clinical information in elevators. And I want to say that that really is the minimal acceptable standard. We need to self-police about what we talk about, limit sidebars. The elevators, it's the same thing as the grocery store and the coffee shop, but we don't think about it because, I mean, for me, this is why I'm thinking about all this anyway, and I'm still not done thinking about it. You can tell it's kind of a half-baked thing because I think there's a lot more to consider. But this is where we live. This is what we do. We live in social settings, whether they're, I don't know, whether they're actual social settings or whether they're virtual social settings. That is where we live. So I get your point that, that it's not going away. We might as well make the best use of it to sort of promote what we do. But I want it to be I want to protect myself too. I don't want my face out there. I don't even like my picture taking people. All right, so, I think the point here is to think about and to know your own standards, the ones that allow you to protect yourself, protect your practice, and protect your clients and patients. And you have something.
Deborah, it looks like we have time for one more comment,
Okay.
and Maggie here has tracked me down. Thank you.
So with regards to social media, if you wanted to dip your toe in or you wanted to be like once removed, one thing that I do is instead of posting stuff about me or what I do with patient advocacy, I post things that come from the different patient advocacy organizations that are informational, or links to articles that mention patient advocacy, as just sharing the knowledge and suggesting that they go to one of those sites and look through the directories that are there to find somebody that might help them.
All right. Thank you very much. Deborah, you have given us such a wonderful presentation, and I loved all of the stories. Would you please
thank you for
show Deborah
sharing.
some info? Thank you. So then we'll have a lunch break. We'll convene back here at 2 o'clock, and you'll see me then. Enjoy lunch.
Some of us will try to make our flights.